Hello everyone, it's Seth, probably better known as Seth from Olive, and it's time for another edition of Against the Odds. So last week, we didn't have an Against the Odds poll, and that's because I had one more Eldritch Moon card that I really wanted to build around before we got back to normal, and that card was Deploy the Gatewatch. So this week, for Against the Odds, we are playing a standard version of Ultimate Super Friends. In fact, we have at least one of every single Planeswalker currently legal and standard in our deck, and our plan is to get as many Planeswalkers as possible on the battlefield at the same time and ride that incremental advantage to victory. So a quick reminder before we break down the deck, if you enjoy Against the Odds and this Deploy the Gatewatch deck, it would be amazing of you if you could take a minute, click the like button, subscribe to the channel, leave a comment. All those things are great ways that you can support the channel and the site for free. Anyway, let's talk about the deck. So the deck is built around Deploy the Gatewatch. Deploy the Gatewatch is essentially a collected company for Planeswalkers. A little more expensive, costs 6 mana. You get to look at 7 cards and put 2 Planeswalkers from among them onto the battlefield. So Deploy the Gatewatch is challenging to build around for a couple of reasons. First off, the most challenging part of Deploy the Gatewatch is what it requires of our deck. We have to play about 20 Planeswalkers to make the odds of hitting 2 Planeswalkers with Deploy the Gatewatch reasonable. So at about 20 Planeswalkers, we're in the 75-80% range to hit 2. So that was one goal of the deck, is we had to play enough Planeswalkers to make Deploy actually good. So in Standard, our Planeswalkers pretty much top out at 6 mana. So we need to hit 2 of them to make the 6 mana cost on Deploy the Gatewatch really worthwhile. If we're hitting 1 Planeswalker, even if we had the most expensive Planeswalker in Standard, like a Sorin or a Chandra, we're still just kind of breaking even with mana. What we need to do is hit a 5 mana Planeswalker and a 6 mana Planeswalker, or even a 4 mana Planeswalker and a 5 mana Planeswalker. When we hit multiple Planeswalkers, almost regardless of what those Planeswalkers are, we're going to be gaining a bunch of mana from Deploy the Gatewatch and getting multiple Planeswalkers on the battlefield. So that's one thing. The other thing is, and this one kind of happened naturally, because one of the rules I set out when I built the deck was we got to have at least one of every standard legal Planeswalker. But part of the challenge is if you play 4 Chandras, 4 Sorins, 4 Obnixilis, and so forth, you can get up to 19 or 20 Planeswalkers, but you're going to hit some doubles where you reveal only 2 Planeswalkers and they are 2 Sorins, and that's the same as hitting 1 Planeswalker. So our deck naturally kind of diminishes that problem by playing a whole bunch of different Planeswalkers, every one that's available. The nut hit from Deploy the Gatewatch is a Sorin and a Chandra. When we hit these two, we are getting 12 mana of Planeswalkers for our 6 mana Deploy the Gatewatch. Sorin helps us get back in the game by killing something, gaining us life, and generates card advantage. Chandra closes out the game with her +1, making the elemental tokens, plus it can wrath away a bunch of like small, medium-sized creatures with the -X. So the absolute best hit we get is those two. After these 2 Planeswalkers, our Planeswalkers are roughly broken down by what they do. So we have some card advantage Planeswalkers. The main thing that Narset Transcendent, Sarkhan Unbroken, and Jason Raveler of Secrets do is +1, draw a card. But the big payoff with Narset is we can -2 it and rebound Deploy the Gatewatch. So we get 2 Planeswalkers, and then our next turn we rebound it, get to cast it again, get 2 more. And that's just one of the most powerful things our deck can do. We're getting up to like 24 mana worth of Planeswalkers for 6 mana and a -2 from Narset. Then we have a bunch of Planeswalkers that are kind of card advantage, or card filtering at least, but also kind of removal. Obnixilis is the poster child. Literally, draw for the +1. Literally, destroy a creature for the -3. Narset has a little more nuance. It's got the red looting ability as the +1. The -2 is really nice because we can use it to get rid of a creature, but we can also get rid of like a Fevered Visions or some sort of enchantment that's bothering us. And Nahiri combos really well with Tamiyo. Tamiyo's a weird one. When I went into this deck, I was thinking it probably wouldn't be very good. We're only playing one of them. But the more I think about it, there is some synergy with Tamiyo tapping down a big creature an Emrakul, for example, an Ulamog, and then being able to use Nahiri to exile it. So there's some weird synergies that you don't even think about built in between the Planeswalkers. Then we have our group of token-making Planeswalkers. So Nissa, Arlencord, and Gideon. The main idea with these are we can clog up the board, make a bunch of chump blockers, help our Planeswalkers live long enough to get to the Planeswalkers that can win the game. And then we have our bad, arguably, Planeswalkers, or bad for our deck. It's funny to call Liliana the Last Hope bad. It is good against aggro if we can play it on turn 3. Problem is, I don't expect we'll be able to play it on turn 3 that often because of tap lands and mana problems. Having double black is going to be a challenge. The biggest problem is the -2 does nothing. We have 0 creatures in the main deck, so it's pretty much just plus Liliana, hopefully kill something, or at least make it smaller so it can't kill our Planeswalkers, plus Liliana, hopefully Ultimate, which can win the game. And Kiora, I think, is the absolute worst Planeswalker in our deck, but we gotta play it for completion's sake. Her +1 can't untap a creature because we don't have creatures. It can untap a land, so if we have 1 white source, we can use Kiora to double white mana to cast Deploy, so there is some value. And the -2, again, can't hit a creature because there's no creatures, so it's just mill 4 and get a land, which isn't that great either. But still, they can serve a purpose, and they're probably the most situational of our Planeswalkers, but they can still be good in the right situation. As far as non-Planeswalkers, we have some cards that care about Planeswalkers. Oath of Nissa might be the single most important card in our deck. Our mana is pretty horrible unless we have Oath of Nissa. If we have an Oath of Nissa, our mana is all of a sudden awesome. Except for the tap land problem, but it finds us Planeswalkers, and it fixes our mana, allowing us to cast Planeswalkers for any color of mana, so we really want an Oath of Nissa. It makes everything so much smoother for our deck. Then we have some more oaths. We have Oath of Chandra, a removal oath for early game creatures, then it turns into like a sulfuric vortex almost, because we're going to have a Planeswalker basically every turn with this deck, so it's constantly just going to deal 2 to our opponent, deal 2 to our opponent, maybe win us the game. Oath of Liliana is kind of the opposite. It gets rid of a big creature if our opponent just has an Emrakul on the battlefield or an Ulamog or something. Oath of Liliana is insane because it makes our opponent sack it. Plus, by making a zombie token on turns when we have a Planeswalker, which again is basically every turn, it allows us to protect Planeswalkers that don't normally protect themselves, or to use non-protection abilities on Planeswalkers, because we're getting that 2/2 zombie as a chump blocker, so we can play a Kiora, and even though normally our opponent would just kill it, we get a chump blocker from the Oath of Liliana. And then last but not least, kind of a flavor fail, the one non-land card that doesn't say Planeswalker, a couple of Radiant Flames. This was just purely a maybe it'll give us a chance to beat aggro, so I figured it was necessary. We didn't want to just like 100% auto scoop to white humans and decks like that. Radiant Flames may or may not be enough, but at least it gives us some chance that we can sweep away the board on turn 3 or turn 4, and then kind of take over with Planeswalkers. Mana base wise, I didn't show all the lands. Basically, we have at least one of each creature land, and we have 2 Hissing Quagmires. We have at least one of each Battle for Zendikar duel, 2 of a couple of them. If we ever have doubles of a land, it is because it's green, and we really want green for Oath of Nissa, because that turns on everything else. 1 of each Pain land, the 4 Evolving Wilds, and then 1 of each basic land. So I didn't show them all because it would have just taken up a ton of room on the slides. I was running out of room in my slideshow. But that's the basic idea. A little bit of everything as far as mana. In the sideboard, we get some more removal. So we can go up to 6 sweepers against aggro decks with Radiant Flames and Languish. Declaration Stone, targeted removal. Ruinous Path is a Planeswalker. Another Oath of Liliana. We have a negate and summary dismissal as counters. Orbs of Warding is really sweet because it protects our Planeswalkers to some extent. Our opponent can't just burn them out because they can't target us, so they can't redirect to our Planeswalkers. Although, it says if a creature would deal damage to us, prevent that damage. So it doesn't really keep our Planeswalkers from getting attacked, but it also keeps us from getting Emrakul with the triggered ability, Thought Knot Seer, discard, some of that stuff that's kind of nice in a deck that's playing a lot of slow, expensive things. A bit of discard in 1 creature in the sideboard, a Den Protector. I figured in matchups where our opponent was going to kill our Planeswalkers a lot, or the game was going to go long, Den Protector getting back a Planeswalker, Deploy the Gatewatch would be pretty sweet. So that is Deploy the Gatewatch in Standard. Whether or not this deck is going to work, who knows? I mean, I think that aggro will be a problem. Mid-range decks and control decks should be a little bit better. The problem with aggro is not only is our deck expensive and clunky and has a lot of variance, but our mana base is amazingly risky. Like, look at all those one-ofs in our mana base. There's going to be a lot of lands enter the battlefield tapped, which means 3 mana planeswalkers are 4 drops, 4 mana planeswalkers are 5 drops. That's going to slow down our deck a bit, and we can get away with that in more controlling or slower matchups and trust that the fact that our cards are simply better than our opponent's cards, once we get to 4, 5, 6 mana, almost nothing our opponent can play is going to match up to what we can play. And once we have a bunch of planeswalkers on the battlefield, there's just so much value drawing so many cards, killing so many things. So if we get to that point, I think we can win. Whether or not we can get to that point against more aggressive decks, that's going to be the question. After sideboarding, it helps. We can bring in more removal. But I imagine Game 1 is super bad against aggressive decks, but that we'll have a decent chance against control decks, especially because people don't play counters anymore. Even the best control decks, like Sheen Sarani's control deck that went 8-0 with the Invitational, they're just not playing counters. They're playing creature removal and stuff like that. And if you don't have ways to counter our planeswalkers, we are going to outvalue you almost regardless of what you're going to do. So I'm going to say that we win. I'm kind of confident with this one. Let's say 40% of the time, but really it depends on the matchups. If we play mono white humans and other aggressive decks most of the time, our record's going to look horrible. If we run into more slow decks and control decks, I think we could post a really good record. So anyway, that's our Against the Odds deck for this week. Enjoy the gameplay videos. Thank you very much for watching, and I will talk to you soon.